it needs to be redefined again. Like it just broke me.
Feel like spiritual health has actually seems to have been at the forefront. Really the power of play, I think, as an intervention here, have robbed them, I think, of play. Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Robbins, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between podcast. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and medium, and here we explore life, death, consciousness, and what it all means. Today, I have Shirin Etessam on the show. She is an entrepreneur, seasoned media executive, and transformational speaker. She has produced films, original television series, specials, and created several companies and led campaigns for some of the world's most recognized companies: ABC, CBS, Discovery, BBC, Facebook, Apple, Intel, Virgin, and many more. A proud member of the LGBTQIA plus community, Shirin founded OML TV, a popular platform dedicated to streaming and curating quality queer female video content and OML originals, a female-led production company telling diverse female stories through a vast spectrum of film and television genres. Today, she guides seekers in her 6-week program, Free to Be, to disconnect their human being from their human doing to find true and lasting fulfillment. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, this seems like you're on a show today we're talking about spirituality. It seems like a far cry from kind of some of your bio: entrepreneur, media exec, transformational speaker. It probably fits in there. But how did you end up here in a spiritual space, exploring spirituality and the soul?
So it's a very good question. And my hope is, and hopefully that will come through in the book, is that, you can do what you do and do spiritual, that you don't have to remove yourself and go to an ashram or a retreat or any of that. You talk about grounded spirituality. That's really what it is about. Practical spirituality, as I call it.
Mhm.
I began my true soul searching at the end of 2013. I went through a major breakup with my partner at the time. We'd been together for 13 years and good friends for 9 years prior to that. And we had a 20-minute conversation, and the 22 years of friendship, partnership, uh, all of it disappeared, vanished. And it really propelled me into, I want to say that it was the catalyst. I mean, it was ultimately the catalyst for the change, but it propelled me into a abyss of darkness and nothing.
Mm.
And it was not only frightening because I didn't know why I was feeling the way that I was feeling. It became clear to me pretty quickly that it wasn't a matter of a broken heart. Everything felt broken, like it just broke me. And I was afraid for the kids because I was like, okay, this can't be good. And so I decided to really look at what was going on because I had all the worldly goods, right? I had everything that would be that one use as a qualifier for success in life, right? I had the beautiful homes, the lofty positions, the accolades, the awards, and all of that, and I felt totally empty inside.
Mm.
So people are like, oh, well, on to a new chapter and such. And I was like, I don't want a new chapter. I want an entirely new book, And
Mm.
so I set out on a quest without really knowing what I was doing. Up until then, I I was what I call a half-ass spiritualist. I would just do spiritual when it was convenient.
And what
And I
did that
realized,
look like? Because I think a lot of people do this. So tell me
yeah,
a
and
bit about what it
I
looks
I
like.
consider it, and I mention it in the book. I consider that a form of spiritual bypassing. So it's basically practicing spirituality when it's convenient. So going to a retreat once in a while, going to yoga and doing, drinking pressed juices or wearing Tibetan jewelry and oming, which all of that is great, but much like going to a gym or seeing a therapist, if you do it once every 6 months and expect some sort of major shift, you might have an aha moment, but it's truly in the practice of it. It's in the integration of it. If you want to transform your body, you go to the gym and you really work that out. If you want to have a perspective shift, you go to a therapist and really dig into what is going on. But people think that somehow spiritual is either just going to dawn upon them or if they go to a retreat that's going to hold them for, the following year. And again, I love all of those things and I do it regularly, but it isn't in lieu of the day-to-day integration and practice. I mean, the Buddhists call anyone practicing Buddhism practitioners for a reason. It's
Mhm.
the practice of it.
Mhm.
So spiritual health, spiritual wellness has to be practiced.
Well,
So
and
that's
all of those, it's called a yoga practice, a meditation practice.
correct.
I even call therapy, I have a therapy practice.
Correct.
Um, People come to my practice and they practice they're doing, I mean, we do the work of therapy, but it's ongoing.
Correct. And I think that spiritual health, my
For those of you who have reached out on Patreon and donated, thank you so much for heeding that call. Thank you. If you have not yet supported the podcast, please go to Patreon, put in Dr. Amy Robbins, and there is an opportunity to support at whatever feels comfortable for you. It helps me with the production costs. My small, very small, but mighty team, it helps keep all of that running. So if you are a fan of the podcast, please consider donating whatever feels good to you. $5 a month, $20 a month. Please take a minute and donate. Also, I am so excited that my course that I have been working on for years is getting ready. We're getting closer. It will be launched at some point this year. So if you're interested, please go ahead and put yourself on the wait list on my website at dramyrobbins.com. Also, if you happen to have any companies that you think are aligned with the vibe of this podcast, I'm looking for sponsorships as well. And the best thing you can do to help this podcast is to spread it via word of mouth. I know so many of you have already said, I've shared this with my friend, or even therapists have shared it with their patients, and patients have shared it with therapists. If you love the podcast, please, please share it. We have an online global reach here. So go ahead, tell your friends, tell your family, rate and review the podcast. Just spread the word so we can continue spreading messages of love and light and consciousness and awareness and science and spirituality and just how to live the most meaningful life that you possibly can. Please support life, death, and the space between.
Theory, my prediction is that spiritual health and spiritual wellness will have their day, much like mental health is having it now. 10 years ago, you being in the field must know, like people were still somewhat ashamed of going to see a therapist. They might, kind of, like, yeah, I'm seeing a therapist. Whereas in now, you have celebrities, you have sports celebrities and the likes of Prince Harry who talk about the benefits of mental health. And I think that is paving the way to spiritual health because I'm near certain you will agree with me. I don't believe that you can have m- full, complete mental health without spiritual health, because then it just ends up, you're kind of moving furniture.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. And I do totally agree. I think part of where I might disagree is I feel like spiritual health has actually seems to have been at the forefront in a way that is bypassing, which I think is some of what you're speaking to.
yes, but the type of spiritual health that I wrote the book about and such. I don't think I, I think that you and I are actually in agreement in that it needs to be redefined.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So how do you define it in the book, and what do you talk about in terms of, because you talked about yoga, meditation, I think breath work would fall in there, sound healing,
Mhm.
eating clean, eating healthy, like all of these practices that are have had been maybe seen as new age before, but are now definitely coming more into the Western consciousness because they've always been in the Eastern consciousness. Um, how else do you define spirituality? And how did you shift from a what did you call it specifically? Like a
FS
dabbler,
spiritualist?
FS spiritualist, a dabbler maybe,
Yeah.
um,
Window shopper, a
a, wi-
spiritual window
a
shopper.
spiritual window shopper. What did that transformation look like when you were brought to your knees?
It's interesting. You said, you mentioned taking it out of the realm of the woo woo. And I think that's really important. I think that if spirituality can be, and frankly, I don't even like the term spirituality because you don't call mental health mentality, it's
Right,
like, I
right.
don't know where that. So the decoupling of spiritual health from the woo woo on one side and from religion on the other side. So it truly is in the redefining. And it is, I believe you call it grounded spirituality. I call it practical spirituality. So that it isn't, because what one is doing is soul work, and soul work is somewhat different than connecting with the spirit, and I could talk about that
Mhm, mhm,
without sounding too woo woo. So the soul work is all internal, and the way that I have my book structured is very, very intentional in that we truly, in order to clear our slate, to get connected with our soul. You hear people say, oh, follow your bliss or follow your heart, which I think is a total misnomer. And I could talk about that. It's truly following one's soul.
mm,
But most people are so detached from their soul. It's like, well, how? Right.
mhm,
So the
mhm,
first part of the book, the first 3 weeks, and again, very, very intentionally structured that way. Part one is 3 weeks, part two is 3 weeks. So 21 days, 21 days. And they say that, there's some studies about making and breaking habits, and that they take usually around 21 days, not to the day, but so
mhm,
the idea is that the first part is dedicated to breaking habits. The second part is dedicated to making new habits in some way.
mm,
So the first week is all about decluttering and detoxing one's mind, because that is the biggest culprit. So, and week two is all about detoxing the heart. When people talk about the heart, it is often around relationships. And that is not where I come from. I mean, it is about relationships overall, but it's really about how to take care of our hearts and how to protect it, and who to share it with, and who to create boundaries with and such. And then week three is all about our body, but beyond
sleeping well and eating well and exercising well. It's really shifting our bodies and honoring it as our only vessel through life. I call it our Uber life, our Uber ride through life.
Mhm.
And so we spend 3 weeks clearing our slate, our runway, so to speak. And hopefully by then, once you have that clearing, it's much easier to get in touch with our soul, which is our true essence. There's a lot of studies that talk about disassociation, somewhere between age 0 and 5, 0 and 7. We disassociate from our true selves. And so, truly, the first part of the book is all about clearing our way so we can get back in touch with our true essence, which is
Mhm.
what I consider the soul. And
Mhm.
then once we've done that, like, okay, then what do you do? And week 4, which is my favorite, it's the beginning of part 2 of the book, is all about play. I'm a huge advocate of play for adults, and I could talk about that. I can't think of a better way than to set one's soul free than through play. And then week 5 is where I talk about the tribe of us, which would be our mind, heart, body, and soul, connecting with our higher selves. And that's
Mhm.
where the dance of the soul and spirit is explored.
Mhm.
And then week 6 is about rewriting one's story. I call it manifesto like you mean it. It's really
Mhm.
manifest with O in parentheses because we have the capacity to rewrite our stories at any given time. Easier for some than others, but it is very possible for us to begin again at any age, anywhere, at any time. But again, how? So I actually have a Venn diagram. I don't know if you've heard of Ikigai, but it was life changing for me. So it is a Venn diagram for finding your raison d'être, your joie de vivre, your reason for living.
Mhm.
So
So let's talk a little bit. First of all, how long did the process? I mean, this is obviously whittled down. How long did the process take you throughout your after you had your, brought to your knees moment? Um,
so yeah,
what did
so
that look like for you?
it messy, dark, dirty. Um, so it took 6 years. And the reason that I wrote the book was that after those 6 years, and I really felt like my life transformed drastically in those 6 years, but I had no idea what I was doing. I called it bobbing for spiritual apples because I really had no clue. And I realized that if I knew what I was doing when I was at that crossroad, and I read many books and such, which definitely helped along the way, but I felt like I was hunting and picking, which in some ways I do feel that one needs to do in order to customize one's spiritual practice. So it
Mhm.
isn't, I would never say, read my book and that is it and follow it. And I think my book is obviously worth a read, and I think that it has some really practical advice. But I there are many teachers out there, and for me, it was really important to kind of customize.
Mhm.
But I had no idea what I was doing. So in reflection, I realized that if I knew what I was doing, that my 6-year process could truly have been distilled into 6 weeks, like if I was it
Mhm.
was sort of like guided. So I wrote the book that I wish I had when I was at that crossroad and on my
Mhm.
knee.
So let's talk about the notion of play.
Yeah.
And why you chose play and what play looks like, how you define play, and how as adults we can find our way back to that playfulness. Because I know I've lost it. I've lost that
Yeah.
love and playful feeling for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's allowing more than anything, it's really allowing ourselves the time and the ability to play. There are 8 different play personality types that were defined by Stuart Brown, who's known as the godfather of play. And I had privilege of spending an afternoon with him. So depending on your play personality, there are different ways of playing, and I won't go through all 8 of them, but most of
I'm
us
very
are a
curious.
so I'll give you some examples.
Yeah.
Most of us are a combination of a few personality types. So, for example, there's the creative. I happen to be very creative, so that could look like, spoken word. It could look like poetry. It could look like prose. It could look like painting. Anything that it could look like macrame, depending
Mhm.
what but intentionally doing that. Um, there's the explorer. I love traveling. I could actually combine traveling and creative, and often do. There is the joker. I love joking around, but I don't like pranking people. So,
Mhm.
again, like I do a combination of those. But then there are ones like the collector. People who collect stamps and
Mm.
coins and such. And I am a total minimalist, so the idea of collecting anything is stresses me out. There's
Yeah.
also the director, and the director, believe it or not, really enjoys coordinating and producing events and such. I mean, I've produced all my life, and
But
I'm
is
quite
that
good at
considered work? That sounds like work, not
exactly,
play.
exactly for you and I. But some people actually get joy out of that. And for them, it's a release and it's a way of really showing up. So if it feels like work, you are not that personality type, and
Mm.
I'm not that personality type. So depending on your play personality type, there are things to do. I love dancing. Dancing is one of my go-to. So at any given time, I will drop everything, put on disco, house music, and dance my butt off like no one's watching, and hopefully no one's watching. It could be depending on what it is. It could be cartwheels. It could, go to a playground and swing on swings, or but actual play. So not as adults, what we usually do is that we'll meet friends at bars, or we'll go to Vegas and do things that have to stay in Vegas. That's not the
Mhm.
type of play that I'm talking about. I'm talking about building sandcastles on the beach, but allowing ourselves, and and I talk about it in the book, but and I geek out over neuroscience and neuroplasticity all the time. But play actually rewires our brain. And for the soul, my God, it's like gifting your soul all the time.
Mm.
So yeah, there's depending on where you are also, and because you could take a 5-minute break at work and do some sort of play activity. It's not like you have to go somewhere, but there are also places that you can go, and like you could play at the gym if you're comfortable at it. It just has to be intentionally unintentional because play can't be for a purpose.
But does it so if you're showing up to take a tennis class,
Yes,
is that
that's not
considered
a play. No.
okay,
No. Yeah,
okay.
if you're out on the court and you are, playing with you're volleying with your, friend, and you're not keeping score as a competitor is another one, and you just have to make sure that it's not for a result, for a goal. It's truly doing it for the joy of doing it.
So
So
it's
if you're
about it's really about the process.
correct. So the competitor actually, they have like watching sports, going to an arena or watching it on TV. That for them could be play. I'm also not in that
Mm.
category, but again, the important thing is not to keep score and not to have it be for the purpose of something else other than play.
This to me is like a big shift. And I'm just thinking about it in terms of my own life, but also the life of our children. You have kids. I have kids.
Too. Yeah, too.
We have robbed them, I think, of play.
Yeah.
When I look around and I see how scheduled kids are and how difficult it can be for them just to play, right? They've got so much stimulation all the time. And what that does developmentally to our brains in terms of moving us away from our soul, really, because
It,
playing is a skill. I mean, it really is a skill. Like when you say play, my initial reaction, and this is why I know I've gotten so far away from it, is that my initial reaction is like, oh shit. Like, what would that even look like? Like, how would I find my way to play?
yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that just speaks to the discomfort in not having structure.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's where also the first 3 weeks of my book come into place. Like, in some ways, you could say that you have to clear the way to the playground, you know? Like, we have no concept of it because we've been adulting for so long, and you and I could have an entire podcast, and I would step onto my soapbox to talk about education and how our kids, at least the public school system, is truly not benefiting our kids holistically, because we are feeding them a lot of information, often without context, so, like, it's not truly meaningful for them,
Mhm.
and yes, robbing them of free time. If I could abolish homework, I absolutely would. I think that kids spending 7, 8 hours at school is plenty, and then after that, have the freedom to play,
But
because
play means not scheduled activities. I know we're sort of getting a little bit off track here, but I think it's important because I
yeah.
think it is why as adults we don't have that freedom anymore.
Absolutely, and I it's again being intentionally unintentional. So allowing yourself, like, okay, for the next 20 minutes, I'm going to play. For the next hour, I'm going to play. Much like we do going to therapy or going to the gym. It is intentionally playing with the belief, and I think that once anyone starts doing so, you feel the benefits of it, much like you would going to the gym or eating right or going to therapy, and will continue to do it. And I was saying, I recently was saying, because a lot of us adults don't feel comfortable going to the playground and swinging. People will be like, what are you doing?
I
And I was
get
saying,
dizzy on those swings now.
whether it's yeah, I mean, whether it's swinging, I kinda do too. I get motion sickness, but I enjoy it, or, like, going down a slide or a seesaw, whatever it is. But people are like, "Oh, well, I feel weird going on it," and I was like, "Yeah, well, whatever it was, like, 15 years ago, if you saw somebody walking down the street and they were talking to themselves, you'd be like, wow, that person's crazy. Now you see somebody walking down the street, they're like, oh, they must be on a conference call,
Right.
right? So the more people do it, the more it becomes normalized and mainstream. So you can be a trailblazer, a pioneer and play.
What do you do to play?
I'm not sure if I can. I tend to be a bit of a bender. So I can sometimes do some things that are I would say mischievous, So in between my very important meetings, I will literally skip down the hall. I As I mentioned, I do the dancing. Dancing's a big go-to. I was uh, I was in I was show running a TV series for Discovery, and one of the things that I would do for my entire staff, I had the production assistant buy a disco ball, and we put it in it was sort of like open space. And anytime the stress level became too high, and it was at random, people could be in a meeting, people could be on a phone call, I would have him turn off the lights, turn on the disco ball, and we would play disco, and everybody was required to dance up until the time I felt the vibe changing. And you could just feel it. You
That's
could feel
awesome.
like, like from high stress to people giggling and all of that. And then boom, we'd be back doing what we were doing, but it would be a major shift in energy. So stuff like that. So, and I could mention so many others, but uh, I think once one figures out their personality type, then just allowing the play activities that are associated with it and baking it in within our days. And most likely you know what brings you joy. You'd be like, okay, yeah, I could do that. And then you integrate it. It could be 3 minutes, within your day, or it could be 3 hours, depending on your time and your commitments and such, but super, super important. And it's made a huge difference in my life. Huge. And I have my kids playing now. They know I can be very serious and I could be really playful. And my wife and I play all the time. So I play with certain friends. I've got my playmates.
What do
Super
you play?
important.
What are your playmates? What do you do with them? I love this idea.
So, it's,
Is it like, yeah, like I'm super curious because I do a lot of walking with friends, walking and talking.
yeah, yeah.
But
So
I don't know if that's play. Is that play?
not really, because we often talk about relationships, we often talk about work, and play is you're not doing any of that. So, so like my friend and I could go for a walk, and I also go for walks. I love, love, love walking. Um, but we'll stop, and we by the water, and you're gonna think I'm crazy, but we'll suddenly become, we'll be by a boat, and then suddenly we'll be pirates, and talk about how we're gonna like steal this boat, and we do various things around it, and then we giggle. It could be like all of 5 minutes, and
Mm.
then and we're off. We could start skipping down. We play hide and seek. I mean, there's so many different things, but it's very impromptu. Like it just like something will spark, and then you give. Like she and I. This was my friend Michelle. She's one of my top playmates,
Mhm.
and we were at a party, and I don't know why, but both of us ended up grabbing they have Bluetooth speakers, and we each grabbed them, and we started dancing around with them like we were acrobats or something. And there's all these videos of us because we look kind of crazy, but we were laughing our butts off. And then we put it back down, and then we were adulting again and chatting and all of that. So,
Mhm. I think
um,
I need to pay attention more to my kids and how they play. Well, not my older ones now because I feel like it's gotten beaten out of them probably. But my little one who's 9, like I'm just thinking yesterday, we were at a my other son's baseball game and I said, "Let's race. Let's have a race." Like and it wasn't competitive. It wasn't like who's going to win. And he killed me because like suddenly my legs apparently don't work that well. And then we skipped back, and then he was climbing a tree, which I would have done. And I was like, this is so playful, but
That's it.
we don't do like, I never do that. I never ever do that. I'm maybe just not a playful mother. But I think finding that connection with our kids, if you have kids, can be a really great place to start for this.
I think absolutely. And we're conditioned to adult. Nobody, I mean, I think that if it was required of us, like it's required of us to go to school and work and all
They
of
should
that,
bring
to,
recess back to work.
oh my God, yes, yes, but with intention. And I was looking at, we were in Florida a few months ago, and I was watching these kids on the beach, and they were so intentional about playing. They were by the water, and one of them would take the bucket and go and get water. And I don't know what they were building, but they all seemed to have their roles and such, and they were kind of helping out, and they were partnering and all of that. And you knew that whatever they were building, especially since it was really close to the water line, would disappear, within an hour. But it did not matter, right? It was
Mhm.
in that activity and the partnership and the presence and all of that. And I was, I would have gone and joined them, except that, the parents would probably think I'm a little weird. So I
Right.
didn't do that.
Who's this lady? Well, and another thing that's interesting too, again, shifting back to kids and just thinking about what this means developmentally for our brains. A couple years ago, I took my son to an audiologist. And one of the
Mhm.
things that she said that she was seeing was a lot more executive functioning. I mean, there's executive functioning issues in kids anyway, but a significant amount more because of the lack of free playtime that kids had in terms of being able to structure things like exactly what you're talking about, the walking back and forth from the water and who's going to have the different roles and how those roles get established and how you navigate conflict and how you plan and how you're intentional about things. And that without and without with the structure that we started bringing in earlier and earlier, when we think about the neuroplasticity of the brain and how we're maybe shutting down, I don't know if this is proven, somewhere it probably is, potentially shutting down a part of the brain that needs to be growing and expanding to learn and to really cultivate these skills at a crucial time, because really around 10, 11, 12 is when you start to see the need for those executive functioning skills to kick in as we move towards, more formal schooling and planning and things like that. How we're doing such a disservice by robbing our kids of this play and what that could mean for us. So that's just
No, I
another
think
piece.
I think you are preaching to the choir, definitely, because I for sure. And that just may be the subject of my next book, because I do think that there is tremendous power in it. I mean, to the point that I've actually uh, began researching the idea of creating play centers, where it wouldn't be a church or a community center or a spa or whatever, but that you could go at any time throughout the day. And, like, I want to have a bashing room. How often do you like get so frustrated and want to just go somewhere and just like bash things, or have a disco room where you could just, it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, but, dance your butt off, and, meditation room. And, I'm thinking like big swings and stuff. So you could just go and truly play and let go for a period of time and feel, safe and good, much like you would go into a gym or go into
Mhm.
therapy. So I think that hopefully we will see some advancements in it, and I have every intention of being a part of that.
Well, Shireen, thank you so much for your time today. This was fascinating. I loved talking about really the power of play, I think, as an intervention here for how to connect us back with our souls.
Yeah.
So
Super,
if
super important.
if people are interested in your work, can you tell them where they can find you?
Yes. So anything and everything relating to my book and the 6-week process is my name, Shirin Etessam. So ShirinEtessam.com. On Instagram and TikTok, it's also Shirin Etessam. And my book comes out on June 20th. And it's already available for pre-sale, pre-order on multiple platforms, obviously Amazon and Barnes and Noble and a few others. And once it comes out, hopefully independent bookstores as well, because that's important to me. Yeah, and I'd love to, and I love hearing from people. So, DM me on social or reach out to me through the website. And I try very, very hard to reply to people personally. And so far, I've been able to. Hopefully, I can keep that up.
Well, thank you so much for your time. And everybody go check out Free to Be.
Free to be.
Free to Be. And it reminds me of that Free to Be You and Me, like when we were kids, which means
Yeah, it was actually one of the reasons. So I was like, should I name it that? Should I not? A lot of people don't know that song or are not of that generation.
Right.
And it felt right. So the tagline is a 6-week guide to reclaiming your soul. And hopefully it'll do that for you.
Well, thank you so much and good luck.
Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Wondering what comes next and what it all means? Head over to Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or anywhere you get your podcasts and hit subscribe. Also, if you could take a minute to rate and review my podcast, I would really appreciate it. Stay tuned as we continue to explore life, death, and the space between.